One day, as I walked back home from my mundane job, I noticed an old man standing beside a jasmine tree, his gnarled hand waving slowly in my direction. The tree loomed large, its fragrant blossoms casting a sweet yet unsettling perfume in the air. The man's appearance struck me as peculiar. He wore tattered clothing that looked like it belonged to another time, and his face was etched with deep lines of age and sorrow. As I drew closer, he seemed to lean forward, his eyes bright with an emotion I couldn't quite place. "I'm sorry," he said, his voice rasping like dried leaves. "I thought you were my daughter. You look just like her." A cold shiver ran down my spine. I didn't respond. Something about his gaze made me feel exposed, as if he could see parts of me that I hid even from myself. I offered a weak smile, the corners of my lips twitching awkwardly, and continued walking, pretending that the encounter hadn't happened. The jasmine tree cast long shadows behind me, as if it were watching my every step. The next day, I decided to visit my neighbor, Mrs. Henderson, an elderly woman who lived alone with her 2 cats. Her home was filled with the comforting scent of baked goods and the soft glow of sunlight filtering through lace curtains. I often sought refuge in her presence, a balm against the strange occurrences I had begun to encounter. As I sat sipping tea, I noticed a picture hanging on her wall, a photograph of the very same man from the jasmine tree. "Who is this?" I asked, my heart beginning to race. "That's my father," she replied, her voice thick with emotion. "He took his life years ago, right by that jasmine tree." The air felt heavier in that moment, filled with unspoken words and memories that clung to us, like the dust motes dancing in the light. My stomach twisted in knots as I processed her revelation. The man I had encountered wasn't just any old stranger. He was a specter of the past, a lost soul tethered to that very spot. The following day, my path led me past the jasmine tree once more. As I approached, I saw him standing there, waving again. My heart pounded in my chest, but I felt a strange compulsion to acknowledge him. I stepped forward cautiously. "Sir, where do you live?" I ventured to ask, a shiver running down my spine. He didn't respond, his gaze fixed on me with an intensity that made my breath catch in my throat. Feeling unnerved, I turned on my heel and continued walking, the air thick with tension. Days passed, and the cycle continued. Each time I passed by the jasmine tree, the old man would wave and comment on my resemblance to his daughter. I found myself caught in a loop of unease, each encounter more unsettling than the last. Then one day I broke the cycle. "Sir, are you okay?" I called out, an unfamiliar bravery surging within me. To my surprise, he looked at me in shock, his eyes widening with a mixture of fear and longing. "You can see me?" he asked in a voice that seemed to echo from a distance. At that moment, an overwhelming urge to run seized me. What if you were like a ghost in a horror movie, cursed to haunt the living? I stood frozen in place until I saw a man emerge from a house behind the old man. "Hey, sir, I'm talking to you," I screamed, waving frantically at the man approaching. He turned to me, confusion etched on his face as I rushed toward him. "Do you see the man behind the jasmine tree?" I asked, desperation rising in my voice. He shook his head, his brow furrowing in confusion. No, I don't see anyone. My heart raced as I turned back to the jasmine tree. The old man had vanished. Panic bubbled within me, and I rushed the stranger to the spot, eager to prove that I wasn't losing my mind. But as we reached the tree, my stomach dropped. The old man was gone, leaving nothing but the rustling leaves and the lingering scent of jasmine. Days turned into weeks, and each time I walked home, the jasmine tree loomed ominously, its branches heavy with secrets. I wanted to forget the old man, yet his presence haunted me, lurking just beyond my consciousness. I often found myself glancing back, half expecting to see him standing there, waving, ready to speak. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, I felt an inexplicable pull towards the tree. Against my better judgment, I approached it again, a nervous flutter in my stomach. The shadows danced ominously, and the air grew thick with anticipation. "Sir," I called out hesitantly, my voice trembling. "Are you there?" Silence enveloped me, and for a moment I thought I was alone. But then I heard it, the soft sound of footsteps crunching on the gravel. I turned quickly, my heart racing, but there was no one in sight. Suddenly, a cold breeze swept through the branches, sending shivers down my spine. I took a step back, my instinct screaming at me to run. And just then, a figure emerged from the shadows. The old man, looking more spectral than before. His face was pallid, the lines of sorrow etched deeper into his skin, and his eyes seemed to reflect a sorrowful truth. "You shouldn't have seen me," he whispered, his voice trembling with an otherworldly quality. "Now you're part of my story." A jolt of fear shot through me. I staggered backward, my mind racing with confusion and terror. What did he mean? Before I could gather my thoughts, he took a step closer, and I felt the air grow colder. "You look just like her," he murmured, almost to himself. "I never wanted this for you." I turned to flee, the instinct to survive overwhelming my sense of reason. My heart pounded in my chest as I ran, the world around me blurring into a haze of fear. I didn't stop until I reached the safety of my home, locking the door behind me, my breath coming in ragged gasps. Days turned into an unbearable silence. The jasmine tree stood as a distant memory, a haunting image forever etched in my mind. I tried to forget, but every night I lay awake, staring at the ceiling, replaying the encounter over and over again. And then one fateful evening, a knock echoed through my apartment. My heart raced as I crept toward the door, fear coursing through me. I hesitated, listening intently. The knock came again, louder this time. With trembling hands, I opened the door, but no one was there. Just the empty hallway, shadows creeping along the walls. I turned to close the door when I noticed something, a folded piece of paper lying on the welcome mat. I picked it up, my hands shaking. The words were hastily scrawled, barely legible. Asterisk, "You can't escape me. I will find you." Asterisk. A chill ran through me, and I dropped the note as if it burned my skin. My heart raced, and panic surged within me. The old man was still out there, watching, waiting. That night, sleep eluded me, my mind racing with possibilities. I felt his presence looming just beyond my reach, a shadow haunting the corners of my mind. I needed to confront this fear to understand what was happening. The next day, I returned to the jasmine tree, my heart pounding in my chest. I was determined to confront the old man, to break free from whatever hold he had over me. As I approached, the familiar scent of jasmine filled the air, a bittersweet reminder of the darkness that lingered there. The tree stood still, its branches swaying gently in the breeze, but there was no sign of him. I felt a mix of relief and disappointment. Maybe I had imagined the whole thing, but as I turned to leave, I heard it, the soft rustle of leaves, the sound of footsteps behind me. I froze, my breath hitching in my throat. "Sir?" I called out, my voice trembling. Suddenly, he stepped into view, his face more distorted than I remembered, a ghostly pallor cloaking him in an unsettling glow. "You shouldn't have come back," he warned, his voice echoing with a sinister undertone. "Why are you doing this?" I demanded, trying to steady my voice despite the fear coursing through me. "What do you want?" He took a step closer, and I could see the pain etched in his features. "I want her back," he said, his voice cracking. "You took her place." A wave of nausea washed over me. Her place? What did he mean? Before I could respond, he reached out, his hand brushing against my arm, and I felt an icy chill run through me. Images flashed before my eyes, memories that weren't mine. I saw a girl laughing under the jasmine tree, her face bright with joy. And then the scene darkened, shadows swallowing her whole. I stumbled back, shaking my head in disbelief. "No, I'm not her. I'm not your daughter." He stepped back, confusion crossing his features. "But you look just like her," he whispered, his voice barely audible. "I thought maybe you could take her place." The realization hit me like a punch to the gut. This man was lost in his grief, trapped in a cycle of longing and despair. But he didn't see me. He saw a ghost of his past, a shadow of the daughter he lost. "I'm sorry," I managed to say, tears welling in my eyes. "I can't be her. You have to let go." His expression darkened, and I felt the air grow thick with tension. "You don't understand. She's all I have left." Before I could react, he lunged toward me, and I turned to run, panic propelling me forward. My heart raced as I sprinted through the streets, the jasmine tree receding into the distance. I could feel him behind me, a dark presence haunting my every step. I didn't stop until I reached the safety of my apartment, locking the door tightly. But even as I stood there, panting and trembling, I knew this wasn't over. The old man was still out there, and his sorrow would not be silenced easily. Days turned into a blur of anxiety and fear. I avoided the jasmine tree, but the memories lingered, haunting my thoughts. I was trapped in a nightmare, unable to escape the past that clung to me like a shroud. Then, one fateful night, the knock came again. I was frozen in fear, unable to move. The knocking grew louder, more insistent. "Let me in," a voice cried out. It was the old man. "Go away," I shouted, my heart racing. "You can't come in, please. I just want to talk," he pleaded, desperation creeping into his voice. Against my better judgment, I opened the door just a crack, peering out into the darkness. His eyes glimmered with sorrow, and I felt a flicker of compassion. "What do you want from me?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. "I need you to understand," he said, his voice trembling. "I can't let her go. I thought if I found someone like her, I could bring her back." "I'm not her," I exclaimed, frustration boiling within me. "You have to move on. She's gone." His expression shifted, the sorrow in his eyes morphing into something darker. "You don't know what it's like to lose someone," he said, his voice cold. "You can't possibly understand." "Then help me understand." I cried, my heart racing. "Tell me what happened." He hesitated, the pain etched on his face. "It was my fault. I wasn't there when she needed me. I thought she was safe, but she wasn't." Suddenly, a flash of understanding washed over me. This man was trapped in his own grief, unable to break free from the chains of his past. But I couldn't let him drag me down with him. "You need to find a way to forgive yourself," I urged, my voice firm. "You can't keep holding on to this. It will consume you." His eyes darkened, and I felt the temperature in the room drop. "You don't get it," he whispered, his voice low and menacing. "I won't let you go. You look just like her." The realization hit me like a thunderclap. I was no longer just a witness to his pain. I had become part of his twisted reality. Panic surged within me, and I slammed the door shut, locking it tight. I could feel his presence pressing against the door, his energy radiating with a desperate longing. "Let me in," he cried, his voice rising in intensity. "You can't escape me." But I wouldn't let him in. I couldn't. I took a step back, my heart racing as I braced myself against the door. "Leave me alone," I shouted, my voice cracking with fear. The knocking stopped, and for a moment, silence enveloped me. I listened intently, my breath coming in ragged gasps. But all I could hear was the pounding of my own heart. Then I heard it, the sound of footsteps retreating into the darkness. I dared to peek through the peephole, my heart racing with uncertainty. But the hallway was empty. He was gone. Days turned into weeks, and I tried to reclaim my life, but the weight of his sorrow hung heavy in the air. I avoided the jasmine tree and the memories it carried, but I could feel his presence lurking in the shadows. One fateful night, as I lay in bed, I was jolted awake by a loud crash. My heart raced as I sat up, the darkness surrounding me thick and suffocating. I grabbed my phone, the screen illuminating the room with a faint glow, but the shadows seemed to deepen around me. Another crash echoed from the living room, and I felt a surge of panic. I slipped out of bed, my heart pounding in my chest, and crept toward the door. I hesitated, fear clawing at my throat, but I had to know what was happening. As I stepped into the hallway, I felt the air grow colder, a chill creeping into my bones. I moved cautiously toward the living room, my breath hitching in my throat as I reached for the doorknob. The door swung open with a creak, revealing a scene that sent a wave of terror crashing over me. The room was in disarray, furniture overturned, glass shattered on the floor, and in the midst of it all stood the old man, his eyes wild with desperation. "You can't escape," he shouted, his voice echoing off the walls. "You belong to me now." I staggered back, my instinct screaming at me to run. "What do you want?" I cried, my voice trembling. "I'm not your daughter." He stepped closer, his expression shifting from anger to despair. "But you look just like her," he said, his voice breaking. I thought if I brought you here, I could bring her back. Terror surged within me, and I felt the urge to flee. You need help, I shouted, desperation clawing at my throat. You can't keep doing this. He hesitated, the anguish in his eyes deepening. I can't let you go, he murmured. I've lost everything. In that moment, I saw the flicker of humanity within him, the man buried beneath layers of grief and despair. But it was too late. The darkness had taken hold. I turned to run, but he lunged forward, grabbing my arm with a grip that felt like ice. Please, he begged, his voice shaking. Don't leave me. I twisted away, adrenaline surging through my veins. I'm sorry, I shouted as I dashed toward the front door, my heart racing. I had to escape. I had to break free from his grasp. As I burst into the night, I could feel the darkness closing in around me. I ran until I reached the jasmine tree, gasping for breath. The tree loomed large, its branches swaying in the wind, and I felt a sense of dread wash over me. But I couldn't stop. I needed to confront this fear once and for all. I turned to face the old man, my heart pounding in my chest. You can't keep doing this, I shouted, my voice echoing in the night. You need to let go. He emerged from the shadows, his eyes filled with a mixture of sorrow and rage. I can't, he whispered, his voice cracking. She's all I have left. In that moment I understood. This man was a prisoner of his own grief, trapped in a cycle of despair. But I couldn't save him. I had to save myself. You have to find peace, I urged, tears streaming down my cheeks. You can't keep holding on to the past. You have to let her go. He hesitated, his expression shifting. For a moment, I thought I saw a glimmer of hope in his eyes. But then it faded, replaced by the weight of his sorrow. I can't, he whispered, his voice barely audible. I can't let her go. And with that, he lunged toward me, and I felt the air grow cold around us. I stumbled back, my heart racing as I turned to run. The jasmine tree loomed behind me, its shadows reaching out like dark tendrils. I ran through the night, the scent of jasmine following me like a ghost, haunting my every step. I didn't stop until I reached the safety of my home, slamming the door shut behind me. My heart raced, and I pressed my back against the door, gasping for breath. But even as I stood there, trembling and afraid, I knew this wasn't over. The old man was still out there, a shadow of grief and despair, forever searching for his lost daughter. And I was caught in the web of his sorrow, unable to escape the darkness that threatened to consume me. As the days turned into weeks, I tried to reclaim my life, but the old man lingered in the back of my mind, a constant reminder of the darkness that had crept into my world. I avoided the jasmine tree, but the memories haunted me, lurking just beyond my reach. Then, one fateful night, the knocking came again, echoing through my apartment. I was frozen in fear, unable to move as the sound grew louder. Let me in, a voice cried out. It was him again. Go away, I shouted, my heart racing. You can't come in, please. I just want to talk, he pleaded, desperation creeping into his voice. But I wouldn't let him in. I couldn't. I took a step back, my heart racing as I braced myself against the door. I had to confront this fear to understand what was happening. Finally, I gathered my courage and opened the door a crack. "What do you want from me?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. "I need you to understand," he said, his voice trembling. "I can't let her go. Why can't you find peace?" I urged, my voice firm. "You have to let her go. She's gone." His eyes darkened, and I felt the air grow thick with tension. "You don't understand. I can't lose you too." Before I could respond, he lunged forward, and I felt an icy chill run through me. I stumbled back, my mind racing with confusion and terror. I had to escape. I had to break free from whatever hold he had over me. But as I turned to run, the shadows closed in around me, enveloping me in darkness. I could feel his presence pressing against me, a weight that threatened to crush me. "You can't escape me," he cried, his voice echoing in the night. I fought against the darkness, desperation surging within me. "I'm not your daughter," I shouted, my voice rising in intensity. "You need to let go." But the shadows only tightened around me, suffocating and overwhelming. I felt myself being pulled into the depths of his despair, the weight of his sorrow crashing over me like a tidal wave. And then, just as suddenly as it had begun, the darkness dissipated, and I found myself standing beneath the jasmine tree, the moonlight illuminating the blossoms above me. The old man stood before me, his eyes filled with a mixture of sadness and longing. "You look just like her," he whispered, his voice breaking. "I thought maybe you could take her place." I took a step back, my heart racing as I faced the truth of his words. I could see the depth of his pain, the darkness that had consumed him for so long. "Please," I urged, my voice trembling. "You have to let her go. You can't keep holding on to the past." For a moment, silence enveloped us, the night air thick with unspoken words. And then, slowly, he began to fade, the shadows around him dissipating into the night. "I'm sorry," he whispered, his voice fading into the darkness. "I never meant to hurt you." As he disappeared, I felt a weight lift from my shoulders, a sense of peace washing over me. The jasmine tree stood still, its blossoms glowing softly in the moonlight, and I knew I had finally broken free from the darkness that had haunted me for so long. I walked away from the tree, my heart lighter than it had been in weeks. I was free from the past, free from the old man's sorrow. And as I stepped into the night, I knew that I would carry his memory with me, a reminder of the fragility of life and the power of letting go.